Hey everybody. So, today I thought we'd talk a little bit about, I don't know, what do I want to talk about? There's actually a movie that came out, I believe it was released in the theaters in February. It's probably streaming now or on Netflix or Hulu or something. It was called Moonfall. And it's essentially a movie about what would happen if the moon were to basically crash into Earth. And it's a disaster film along the same lines of the movies from the 70s, Earthquake, Airport, even the movie 2012, recently like Don't Look Up, Independence Day, Armageddon. So I understand and I fully acknowledge that I want you to understand, I know that it's a work of fiction, but I thought it was kind of interesting because the moon crashing into the Earth is pretty much an impossibility. The reality is the moon is actually moving about 1.5 inches, give or take, away from spaceship Earth every year, which coincidentally is actually, if you didn't cut your fingernails, that's about the length that they would grow in an entire year, about 1.5 inches or so. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the science behind all this, but the moon doesn't crash into Earth for really one simple reason: orbit. And what is orbit really? It's just speed. And it's able to maintain that speed because in space there's no resistance, aka air. And while we're on the subject, the moon's got a 27-day orbit, and it's going about, 22,250 miles an hour. And the movie's premise to simply change its orbit or to change its that's no small feat. In order to change its orbit, really, you got to change its speed. And unlike the movie that I just mentioned, Armageddon, you can't just, hit it with a rocket and it's going to move. Even the smallest change in an object that size would require a massive amount of force. Massive amount. Which is one of the reasons why these massive objects in space tend to not move. That's why they're stable. Now, I've not seen the movie, so I'm assuming, I guess the premise is some mysterious force messes with the moon and causes this. So I thought, well, what if it were to happen, for argument's sake, even though all science points to the fact that it can't, but let's just table that for a heartbeat and say, well, what if it were to happen? Now, keep in mind, I don't know, the moon's probably about 4.5 billion years old, roughly the same age as the planet. It's actually about the width of Australia. That might give you some perspective on its actual size. And it's about, give or take, about 238,000 miles away. So it's a good distance away. And really all the moon does, its sole purpose or effect on the planet, is it slows our rotation down slightly, so our days are just a hair longer. And obviously the ocean tides, about twice a day, the tides move, about 1.75 feet, give or take. The high tide and low tide is what it currently is, and that happens about twice a day. But let's just assume for just a moment the moon is going to start heading towards spaceship Earth. So I don't know how long this process would take, but if we just look at it from distance, about the time it goes from 238,000 miles down to about 25,000 miles from Earth, so it's closed, well over 100,000 miles. Those tides I was just yapping about that are just a hair under 2 feet are now going to be 13 feet twice a day, which is going to have a massive effect, obviously, on coastal cities if the oceans are sweeping up 13 feet instead of 1.5 feet every day. The moon will appear a little bit brighter in the sky, I would think, at that point. But every single day, those tides are going to get a little higher, a little stronger. About the time the moon gets to, 85,000 miles, Yeah, 85,000 miles in the sky. Um, those same tides, now they're 32 feet twice a day. 32 feet. At this point, most of our normal infrastructure, that's begun to crumble. There's probably 1 billion homeless people, especially along the coastlines, because all their crap is underwater. And even though, I'm sure you know, about 95, 97% of all of our communication is actually still through fiber optics and cables, yes. And most of that is under the ocean floor, which really wouldn't be disturbed by water, but all of the terminal connections and stuff, which are or were above ground, because at 85,000 miles, the ocean would have consumed those terminals housing all of the fiber optic cables that give us the internet, which you're able to watch me on. Thank you, by the way. Watch movies and do a ton of really communication. Most of our rivers are now salt filled because the tide at 32 feet, it is so strong that rivers are beginning to flow backwards, filling with ocean and salt water, twice a day. Which in that time period will begin to affect our groundwater, contaminating it with salt. All of the ports would obviously be gone, which means food shortages of goods. So pretty much what's on the shelf is what we're going to have. Gas, if gas rationing, or the end of gas as we know it, because most of the refineries around the world are actually on the coastline, so those are now all underwater. As I said, the ports would be closed, so very, very little food. And we would spend most of our, who's ever still around, waking moments, if we haven't killed each other, scavenging for food, and then when those tides come, retreating to the skyscrapers and the tallest buildings to avoid drowning. And again, that's at, 85,000 miles. Now, when the moon gets to 60,000 miles, navigation and communication satellites that are out in space, the gravitational pull of that celestial body we call the moon is going to start to affect them. Where it's at now, it's far enough away that the satellites are able to stay in their own orbit, far enough away from Earth with their little rockets not to get pulled in. An occasional rocket here or there, keeps them circling Earth. But as the moon gets closer, it's going to start to mess with that orbit, and all of our communication satellites will either plummet back to Earth because they'll have exhausted all their correctional fuel, or shot off into space to where they're no longer any use to us. By the time the moon's at, say 40,000 miles from the planet, now those tides that we talk about twice a day, those are 330 feet in height. 330 feet. That's tremendous, tremendous. Now at that point, the low tides, those are going to start to show us or expose the continental shelves. Because so much water has gone onshore, if you will, that once what was under the ocean will now be seen. So we're going to start losing fish life as we know it, and the gravity that the moon is going to begin to exert at that point. Instead of it pulling the oceans, it's going to start to squeeze the Earth. The Earth is going to start to, ellipticize just slightly as the moon is going around, and because the oceans will no longer be able to sort of handle it because the moon has gotten so close, which means there's going to be earthquakes and volcanoes. And at that point, I don't think there would be night anymore. The moon would be so close and so large in the sky, reflecting the sunlight. Basically, night just becomes twilight all the time. So by the time I think we reach, say 25,000 miles, which is about the same space that those satellites I was just yapping about a moment ago, that was the space they occupied. That's at the point to where probably half the planet is flooded that didn't used to be, and the other half, where there used to be ocean or water, there is no longer. At that point, The moon's going to orbit the Earth every 24 hours, and it'll never appear to leave the sky. It's going to rotate. Again, it's rotating with us, right? Our days are 24 hours, so it's doing this. So half the planet will see the moon all the time, and we'll see it go through its 4 phases, which is what? New, full, waning, and waxing gibbous. And again, half the planet won't see it, and the other half will. It depends on where it settles, because it'll be in conjunction with Earth's orbit. Now, since Earth's gravity is about 6 times stronger than the moon's, I know what some of you are thinking. As it gets closer, the gravitational, that force of the moon, will it start to pull things off of our planet? No, because our gravity is so much stronger. But I think stuff on the moon, loose rocks and things like that, will begin to be, the Earth's gravity will begin to pull some of that off of the moon. And it'll also, the Earth, it being that close, the moon itself will start to ellipticize a little bit, which is going to cause moon quakes and cracks in that moon. Now, by the time it gets to, say, 6,500 miles from Earth, the moon now orbits the Earth faster than it rotates. So, the Earth is doing this slowly, and the moon is just going to be doing this, right? Which means the tides are going to reverse. Again, massive volcano activity, continued earthquakes, ash and lava and whatnot will start to fill the sky, blocking the sun, which eventually will cause the planet to have potentially a rapid cooling, which will kill most of the life as we know it, except for those of us who have probably figured out how to get into a submarine, where we could get enough food stored theoretically and survive what now would be full-fledged Armageddon, I would imagine. But what happens though, once we get into that 6,500 mile, 8,000 to 5,000 mile, I think they call it the Roche Point or the Roche Point or limit. And that's basically the distance from the celestial body within a second celestial body. It's held together only by the force of gravity. It'll start to disintegrate, which is really, really complicated math. And all that essentially means that the moon will break into about 1 million pieces and become basically like a ring around Earth, much like the rings of Saturn. With all the earthquakes that the moon had been having for the last several thousand miles, as it got closer to Earth, it would just essentially be pulled apart. Earth's gravity would just pull it apart, and there would be chunks circling our sky for God knows how long. Now, without the moon being there and that gravitational force, we will stop being squished. We will return back to quote unquote normal. The sea will return to some sort of normalcy. No tides, obviously. Theoretically, the volcanoes and earthquakes would stop. And I can only imagine that the night sky would glimmer in the evenings with the reflective nature of big moon rocks circling the sky like the rings of Saturn. And meteor showers. I imagine that will be going on constantly, which would be kind of cool. But I don't know a whole lot about it. But as that stuff's raining down, that could cause friction, which could cause heat, which could start fires, which would get more ash, blah, 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 and maybe a mini ice age, or the surface of the planet being frozen for who knows how long before it all resets. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Wanted to share with you what would actually happen if the moon were to descend on the planet, which is, I don't want to say impossible because nothing's impossible, but probable. I think, I've not seen the movie, so I don't know what their premise is, but I heard about it and I thought it was kind of interesting, and I felt compelled to share. But the reality is the moon is actually slowly pulling away from us at about 1.5 inches a year. So in several billion years, it may break free of Earth's orbit, and that'll create a different sort of challenge for us. But none of us watching this today or in the next several millennia need worry about it. Anyway, I hope you got a kick out of that. I thought it was kind of fun. The moon stuff always fascinates me. The math's a little complicated, but I don't know. I think it's kind of fun. Anyway, in this world, when you could be anything you want, you be kind, you be humble, you be forgiving, and you'd be melting snow. And don't worry about the moon. It's not coming anywhere near us anytime soon. Bye.